Hello everyone. So welcome back to another video on this channel. And in today's video, we are going to try to build a personal finance management app using ChatGPT, React.js, and hopefully with some CSS as well. And with that in mind, let's start off with the video for the day. So the first thing that you need to do is you obviously need to sign up to ChatGPT, and you can also create an account on Code Sandbox. So Code Sandbox is a website where you can create React.js websites directly on the browser, and if you wish, you can create the website offline as well. So once you're signed into ChatGPT, the first prompt that we will add is we'll first ask ChatGPT to the steps to build a personal finance management app using React.js and CSS with code. So with this prompt, ChatGPT replies us with the following steps. The first step is to use a index create React app to create an app locally, which we don't need since we are using Code Sandbox. Then we need to install some dependencies, which is React Router DOM, Axios, and React Bootstrap. So let's do that. So in the Code Sandbox, the first thing that we will do is we will add React Bootstrap. Then we'll add Axios. And the last dependency, I believe, was React Router DOM. So let's add React Router DOM as well. And we hit enter. So we have React Bootstrap, Axios, and React Router DOM installed into our dependencies. Now let's move ahead to the next part of the prompt. So in this, we are supposed to create a folder structure, and we need to create a folder for components, assets, and API. So currently we are not focusing on the backend part. So we'll just create a components folder into our Code Sandbox. So let's give it a name components. And also let's rename this to something which is much more readable, like personal finance app. And then move ahead with the next part of the session. Now, the first thing which ChatGPT tells us is to create a navbar. So the navbar contains the brand title, which is My Finance app, and it contains links to home, then transaction, budget, and settings. So what we will do is we will first come to the components part, and it has asked us to create a navigation component. So as you can see, the name is navigation. So let's have a component here with the name navigation.js. Then copy the code from navigation.js file and add it into navigation.js. Now, once this is done, we can test whether this works properly or not by coming to app.js and importing the component by writing import navigation from /component/navigation, and then adding the navigation component into our app component. So let's remove this and let's add navigation. And it's saved. Now, as you can see, the styling of the navigation.js is not proper. That is, the navbar component and other stuff is shown, but it is not styled properly. So I went to the React Bootstrap website and they told to import the Bootstrap from Bootstrap npm. So firstly, we need to install Bootstrap npm as well. So we come back to our Code Sandbox, and here we add Bootstrap npm. Then we come to app.js and we import the Bootstrap CSS file. So we'll copy this file from here, the link to Bootstrap CSS, and we'll add it at the top of app.js, just below the styles.css. And now, as you can see, we have the navbar with home, transaction, budgets, and settings. So let's move ahead with the next part of the ChatGPT prompt. And here we have the home component. So we need to create a home component and add the code from here. So let's copy the home component. Then in the components folder, we can add home.js and paste the copied code. So the home component currently displays welcome to finance app, and here's a summary of responses, finances. So we'll try to make this a little better in future, like in some time, but for now, I think this should be enough. Then it is telling us to create a transactions component. So in the home component, we just have an h1 tag with welcome to finance app, then summary of finances. And now let's go through the transactions page code. The first thing that we do is we import use state and use effect. Then we have Axios to make a API call to the backend server or backend API. Then we have a state variable called transactions, which contains the actual transactions of the page. Then we have an API call to the backend server where we get the transactions, and then we set the transactions to the transaction array. And then we have a table in which we have the entire transactions detailed out, like we have date, description, and amount columns, and within that we are showing the transactions, date, description, and amounts. So let's copy the entire transaction component and add it to a new file, which is transactions.js. Then copy the entire code and paste it in the transactions.js file. Now the next file that it tells us to create is a budgets page. So in the budgets page, the flow is similar. We have use state and use effect. We have access imported for API calls. We have a budget as state variable. Then we have the axios.get, which is a API call to backend server, and here ChatGPT stopped. The reason why it is stopped because there is a character limit. And to get over the character limit, what we do is we just type continue, and ChatGPT continues from the previous prompt and writes the code and continues the code. So let's copy the code of the budgets component from the first code snippet, and let's create a budget component here, budgets.js, then paste the code. Now the code is remaining. So we go back to the ChatGPT, we type continue, and then we copy the rest of the code, which is from budget amount. So you can shift select the code, which is still here, and export default budgets as well. So copy the code and paste it after the budget amount. So we in the budgets component, we have the budgets mapped out in a table as well, and that's the entire budget component. Now the next thing that it tells us is to create a settings page. So let's create a settings.js file. And in the settings.js file, we have some code. Okay, I'm going to pause the recording. I think my charging is low. Just a moment. So now we are creating the settings page. So let's copy the settings code from here till the end. So we go on shift select. When we type continue, sometimes the code does not get printed properly. That's fine. It will get improved in the successive versions of ChatGPT. So let's add the settings component as well, and it's save. The next thing that we have is the app component rewritten, and here we have first the browser router or the router from React router DOM. Then we have switch and the route component. Then we have imports of components which we created just now, like navigation, home, transactions, budget, and settings. Then there is a path laid out for each component, like transactions for transaction component, budgets is set to path, and settings is set to settings path. So let's copy this code and add it to our app.js file. And the app.js, we need this bootstrap import. So I'm going to paste it below and going to take these styles and import from here and add it into the bottom of the copied code, and then remove the component. And it's it. Now let's just, okay, my transactions component is not written, the file name is not proper. So let's rename it to transactions. Now the thing is, the code which ChatGPT returned us is from React router version 5, like browser router switch and route were in version 5. In version 6, the syntax is changed a bit. So what we can do is we can get to the React router DOM version here, and instead of 6.9, we can change it to some version of version 5, so that we are able to use the previous version code. I'm going to select 5.3.2 just to test it out, and it's saved. So it will load the React router DOM 5.3.2, and then hopefully it will work. Yeah, it has worked. So this is the home component, which is on default path. And here we have welcome to my finances app and summary of finances, which is currently empty. We'll take care of that in some time. Then we have the transactions component on /transactions path. So here it should show transactions. Then let's just see what the issue is. I think this is right, but we'll rewrote it in some time. Now let's just go back to the home component and let's just check budgets. If budget is showing the same error. No, budgets is working properly, but budgets.map is not working properly. That's fine. Sometimes code sandbox shows some weird errors. And let's just check out the settings page as well. So this is our settings page. Now let's come back to home component and continue on with our code. So we need to copy the CSS as well. So we are copying the entire CSS and we are adding it to the style.css file. So we are going to replace the .app with this file. Now we are done with the CSS part as well. Then I asked ChatGPT to rewrite the CSS because it printed it halfway, but I think it should be fine for now. The next thing that we can do is we can then rewrite our home component first of all, because home component should show some finances, right? So what I did was I added a prompt which is generate some dummy data in home component for our personal finance app from the previous prompt. So what ChatGPT did was it rewrote the home component and it added a JSON here, JSON array with some dummy transactions with ID, description, amount, and date. And then it showed those transactions within the render transactions component. And so this render transactions functions then shows the amounts with the transactions.map function. And in the render transactions, we have this code. And on top of that, we have the transactions printed out. So let's copy this code and add it to home.js and hit save. So now our personal finance management transactions or app shows some transactions like coffee, salary, and rent. So coffee will be a debit amount, so it's showing minus 3.5. Salary is a credited amount, so it shows 2000 as positive, and rent is a debited amount, so it shows minus 500. Now, similarly, we can rewrite the transactions component. So what is happening is this use effect is actually changing our code and it is throwing an error. So let's remove the use effect from here and comment out Axios as well. Then take the transactions data from here, like the transactions data which is present here. So we are just going to take this transactions data. And for now, we will just add it at the top of the component with name transactions data. And we'll pass it to the use state variable so that transactions has some initial value. And now let's see if transactions works properly. So now we are in the transactions. Okay. And the transactions component, we have the same data with the transactions shown. Similarly, what I did was I also asked ChatGPT to rewrite my budget component with the prompt generate dummy data for budget component from the previous prompt, and it created a categories for budget like food, rent, transportation, and it showed it in the categories with name, budget spent, and the budget spent minus budget minus spent data, and it shows in the budget component. So let's copy this code and add it to the budgets component. So we will paste the code, and now let's see what happens in the budgets part. So in this table, we have the food, rent, transportation with the budget and what is spent and what is remaining. So this is how the table looks like right now. So with this, we have at least a little bit working a personal finance app. And then what we can do is we can again go on adding some more functionality to it, like a input field from which we can add the transactions amount to this table, then add some code in the transactions which can reflect it to the transactions component and so on and so forth. So we are going to cover that in the second part of this video. So in the first part, we are just setting out the basic boilerplate for a personal finance app. Make sure to save your conversation in ChatGPT if you use these prompts, because in future we will use the same conversation and add the code to our project. So that's it from my end for today. Thank you and have a nice day. Goodbye.